Good evening and welcome to the Domestic Violence Hotline on CAN TV, Hotline 21. This is a live interactive show brought to you by CAN TV and Connections for Abused Women and Their Children. My name is Megan Rosado. I'm the Direct Services Volunteer and Education Coordinator for CAWC. CAWC is a domestic violence victim service agency here in Chicago. I'm so glad again that you could join us this evening for this segment of the Domestic Violence Hotline. For the next 25 minutes, we'll be discussing the topic of domestic violence, what it is, the definition, some of the types of abuse, some of the myths around domestic violence, as well as services that are available at CAWC, Connections for Abused Women and Their Children. Our phone lines are open. You'll see the phone number at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to call in with your question or comment, please do so. The phone number is 312-738-1060. I'd like to begin our discussion this evening by defining just what it is that we mean when we say domestic violence. If I ask you to tell me what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the terms domestic violence, many times folks will mention something physical, hitting or pushing or some other type of physical violence. And while physical violence is certainly a part of domestic violence, really the types of abuse and the definition is much broader than that. I often find that people have a very limited picture of what really includes domestic violence. So you'll see on the screen we have our definition. Domestic violence can be called many different things. Sometimes it's referred to as intimate partner violence, sometimes family violence, sometimes dating violence. Regardless of what terms you're using, we're talking about a pattern of coercive behaviors that one person uses to establish power and control over an intimate partner, family, or household member. The range of behaviors can include physical, emotional, verbal, sexual, and financial abuse. Perpetrators of domestic violence usually use a combination of different tactics over time. Domestic violence can occur in dating relationships, among married or other committed couples, and among family members. Relationships are defined in a much broader context under the law. The Illinois Domestic Violence Act, or the IDVA, includes relationships, people who have a current or former dating relationship, people who are related by blood or current or previous marriage, people who have or allegedly have a child in common. It also includes people who share a home or another common dwelling. So it can include someone that's a roommate, persons with disabilities, an elderly, and their personal assistants or their caregivers. One of the myths about domestic violence is that it occurs in only lower socioeconomic groups or in select racial or ethnic groups. And the reality is that domestic violence does occur in all races, cultural groups. It also occurs among all socioeconomic levels and in heterosexual and in same-sex relationships. Anyone can be a perpetrator of domestic violence regardless of their gender identity, although we do tend to see a disproportional number of perpetrators who are men and victims that are women. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have reported experienced severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. So maybe being hit with a fist or something hard, being beat or slammed against something. Many believe that there are no significant differences between heterosexual domestic violence and same-gender domestic abuse. And to a certain extent, that is true. At the core of violence and abuse is still the tactics of power and control, but people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual have an equal or higher prevalence of experience intimate partner violence, sexual violence and stalking as compared to heterosexuals. Again, many of the tactics used will be the same in relationships, but there also may be some unique and different tactics as well due to the vulnerability of somebody's sexual orientation or their gender identity. We actually know that transgender people experience pervasive harassment and bullying throughout their lives, and abusive partners can use these same tactics against transgender survivors of intimate partner violence. Transgender survivors are actually almost 2 times more likely to face threats and intimidation and to experience harassment based on their identity, based on their transgender or their gender identity within abusive relationships. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence or intimate partner violence, and you'd like assistance or just call and talk to someone to get some feedback, you can call CAWC's 24-hour hotline and speak to a trained domestic violence advocate. And you'll see the number there on your screen. It is 773-278-4566. And all of our services are free and confidential. You'll see I've also included CAWC's website. And we're also on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, so you can follow us on your social media as well. For those of you who are just joining us, again, I want to welcome you to the Domestic Violence Hotline on CAN TV and remind you that our phone lines are open for your questions or comments about domestic violence. So far, we've been discussing the definition of domestic violence as being a pattern of behaviors in which one partner tries to achieve power and control over the other partner. And as previously mentioned, there's a combination of tactics that are used. I want to show you our power and control wheel, where you can see in more detail what kind of tactics are used. You'll see on this wheel that the physical and sexual violence are on the outside of the wheel. Although these acts tend to occur less frequently than some of the emotional, financial, and other types of abuse, they are very effective ways to intimidate someone and keep them from objecting to some of the other tactics and forms of abuse. Emotional abuse can include putting somebody down and making them feel bad about themselves, name-calling, playing mind games, making the victim think that they're crazy. Abusers may try to humiliate the victim or make them feel guilty. Sometimes abusers will use their privilege to justify their behavior or to set up certain distinction of roles. That may include treating their partner like a servant, being the person to make all the decisions, acting like they are the master of the castle, or the person that gets to define what roles belong to each partner in the relationship. Abusers will often use intimidation. They may use looks, actions, or gestures. They may smash things or destroy property. They may abuse pets or display weapons as a way of letting victims know just what might happen if they do not go along with whatever the abuser wants. People who abuse in their relationships often fail to take accountability for their actions. Instead, they will minimize, deny, and blame their partner for the abusive tactics that they're using. They might act like the abuse wasn't that serious. They might say that it didn't happen or shift responsibility again, saying that the victim is the one that caused them. They were pushing their buttons. They were nagging them. They were giving them a hard time. Saying that the victim is at fault because they started an argument when they bring up a certain subject or when they talk to a specific person. An abuser may also avoid responsibility. Sometimes they will say that they were under the influence of alcohol or other drugs. That is often another myth of domestic violence. Many people believe that domestic violence is caused by the use of alcohol or other drugs, and we do often see a correlation between the two issues, but there are many abusers who use violence in their relationships and they don't use any substances. And then there are other folks that use substances but don't use abusive tactics in their relationships. Moving on to some of the other tactics, we see threats. Oftentimes abusers will make or carry out threats to hurt their partner. They may threaten to leave their partner. They may threaten to commit suicide. And that's a very powerful control tactic. Who wants to be responsible for somebody else taking their own life? Oftentimes, abusers will make threats to report the victim to their public aid worker, to the Department of Children and Family Services. They may threaten to report the person to immigration. They may make them do illegal things and then threaten that they will report them to the police. And sometimes abusers will use threats to make victims drop charges if there have been any charges pressed due to any of the incidents. Sexual coercion is another tactic, and this includes manipulating or forcing their partner to have sex, getting their partner pregnant, getting their partner drunk, or using them drugs, again, for the purpose of having sex with their partner. Isolation and exclusion is another powerful tactic that abusers use. They may control what the victim does, who they see and who they talk to, where they go. They may try to limit outside involvement and may use jealousy to justify their actions, saying that, you know, it's not that I don't trust you, it's that I just don't trust other men or I don't trust other women, you know. You're just so lovely and beautiful that I just can't imagine, and just the thought of someone else talking to you makes me uncomfortable. And if you're my partner, then you should respect that and not talk to those other people. Economic abuse is also very common. Abusers will often try to prevent their partner from getting or keeping a job. They may take the victim's money. They may not let the victim know about or have access to the family income. Children are also not only affected by the violence, but they can also be used by the abuser as a control tactic. They may make the victim feel guilty about the children, or they may use the children to relay messages between the victim and the perpetrator. Abusers may threaten to hurt the children or to take the children away, to fight in custody court for the children. Abusers may use visitation with the children as an opportunity to harass the adult victim as well. So you can see how domestic violence does include more than just physical abuse, and how it can be really complicated for a victim to leave an abusive relationship because of the control that an abuser has established. When I'm conducting community education about this issue, I often hear comments from individuals stating how they would never put up with an abusive partner, and that the first time that they were hit, they would, you know, draw a red line and they would leave the relationship. And what I often find is that folks are not always considering that the first hit doesn't usually come at the beginning. Oftentimes some of the physical and sexual abuse isn't a tactic that gets used until once the relationship is already established, using some of the other types of abuse. I've spoken to countless survivors who have said that the first incident of physical abuse didn't occur until well after the relationship was established. Maybe they were already living together, or maybe after getting pregnant with the abuser's child. Also, you need to always remember that abusers are very good at making victims believe that it's their fault. So that's another way that oftentimes it can be difficult at the beginning to recognize if someone is in an abusive relationship themselves. I'd like to once again go to our overhead. If you or someone that you know is in an abusive relationship and you would like to talk about this, you can call our 24-hour domestic violence hotline, 773-278-4566. Focusing on another myth about domestic violence is that the victim must not really object to the abuse, or that they somehow contribute to the abuse if they don't choose to end the relationship right away and leave. And people say, you know, I don't understand why this person stays. Why don't they just take their kids? Why don't they just go? Don't they know that there's other help out there? They must get something out of being in this relationship. And it's simply not true. Nobody likes being beaten, or abused against their will. Victims of domestic violence will have their own reasons for staying in an abusive relationship. They may feel guilty or sorry for the abuser. They may believe that what the abuser has told them about themselves, such as that they're worthless or they're stupid, they're incapable of making it on their own. They may be afraid that the abuser will try and take the children. They may not have any economic resources, again, as a result of maybe the economic coercion that has been set up. And again, the abuser oftentimes sabotages attempts to either get or keep a job. One of the main reasons why victims stay is fear. It's not uncommon for an abuser to threaten to stalk their victim and to kill them if they leave the relationship. Statistically, the most dangerous time for someone is after they've left the abusive relationship, or during the process of leaving or ending the relationship. When we hear in the news about homicides that happen when there was a domestic relationship, we'll also hear that usually the victim or the survivor was trying to end the relationship. They had gone to court and maybe tried to get an order of protection. They had gone to a family member or to a friend's house. Despite the fear of the increased danger that's often associated with leaving an abusive partner, I want you to know that most victims do leave the relationship or find other ways to enhance their safety. Again, we always want to keep in mind that most abusive relationships develop over time, and that leaving is going to also be a process. The process can be psychological, one of not being ready to leave one's partner, feeling cultural or religious pressures not to end the relationship, or maybe they really just want the abuse to end, but not the relationship to end. And so they may be thinking that there's something else they can do, maybe if they go and they get counseling or they get couples counseling. It's not something that we actually recommend in domestic violence situations, that if they do something different, then they'll be able to end the abuse and stay in the relationship. Another part of the process of leaving a relationship is gathering tangible material and social supports that are necessary in order to leave safety. As I mentioned, one of the most dangerous times for someone is once they've ended the relationship. And so we need to really understand all of the different barriers that victims face in trying to access services. There are not enough shelter beds for the need that is out there. Unfortunately, at CAWC, we are full usually to capacity, and every day we receive calls on our hotline of people that want to end their relationship and don't have any other safe options of where to go. Again, If you or someone that you know is in an abusive relationship, you can call our 24-hour hotline to speak to a trained advocate about your situation and to get information about options and resources that might be available. In addition to our 24-hour hotline, CAWC provides individual and group counseling for survivors, information and advocacy around legal rights and options. We provide services for children and more. We have a walk-in program that's located in the Humboldt Park community. We also staff the Hospital Crisis Intervention Project, which are located at Cook County Hospital of Stroger Hospital of Cook County and also Northwestern Memorial Hospital. And finally, we operate a shelter program, as I mentioned before, for victims and their children who need a safe place to stay as they try and escape the domestic violence. You can find out more about our programs, again, by calling the number on your screen, 773-278-4566, or by going to our website, cawc.org. Finally, I'd like to finish our discussion by talking about some of the things that you as an individual can do to help a friend or family member that may be experiencing domestic violence. The first thing is not to be afraid to tell them that you're concerned for their safety. Tell them that they deserve a healthy relationship. Acknowledge that they are in a very difficult and scary time, a very scary situation. Let them know that it's not their fault. To be honest, that cannot be underestimated, the power in telling somebody that what they're experiencing is not their fault. It is a responsibility of the person that is hurting them. Even if they have all different kinds of excuses, there's always another option than using violence and abusive tactics to control their partner. And so it's the responsibility of anyone to find other ways to communicate with their partner. Violence and abuse is never okay. Make sure that you are supportive and that you listen to your friend or your family member. Remember that it is probably very difficult for them to talk about the abuse, so let them know that you're available to help whenever they may need it. Even if they're not ready to talk then, let them know in the future they can call on you. One of the myths around domestic violence is that victims are somehow accepting of the abuse. In fact, the person is probably using many different tactics on a daily basis to increase their safety and to manage what they're going through. Remember that you really cannot rescue another person, and an important thing to keep in mind is that there's usually not an easy solution. Even ending the relationship doesn't guarantee that the abuser will stop being violent. So if they tell you that their abuser vowed to kill them if they leave, and if they leave it's going to make the situation much worse, believe them. Ask them what do they think might be helpful in their situation. Encourage them to call CAWC and talk to somebody about some safety tips. Another myth about our services is that somebody needs to be ready to end the relationship in order to give us a call, and that's also not true. We work with survivors who are in many different stages of their relationships, and that's fine. Make sure that you engage your loved one and ask them to participate in activities with friends and family. If they end the relationship, make sure that you continue to support them. They may still have times when they feel sad and lonely, even though the relationship was not a healthy one. It does take time to mourn the loss of the relationship. And then finally, try and refrain from judging and respect your loved one's decisions. As I stated, there are many reasons why people stay in abusive relationships, and you don't want to criticize their relationships or make them feel guilty. We are about to wrap up, and one more final overhead. I just want to invite you all to join us on Sunday, October 29th for our domestic violence awareness rally. You can call us for more information about that. And thank you again for joining us this evening. Please stay tuned for the next show to start in about 5 minutes.